Hello, everyone, and welcome to Module 2, all about flow, cycle, and triggers. And we're really excited to dive in with you today. So in the last module, we talked about our cognitive state of peak performance, both mentally and physically, where we feel and perform our best. And that is flow and why flow is so valuable. Today, we're going to talk about flow triggers that help lead us into flow states by reducing our cognitive load and stimulating dopamine. The topics that we'll cover today are: what is cognitive load? What is the flow cycle? And how can you use flow triggers?
In this age of stimulation overload, we must actively protect our minds from multitasking and use strategies that lower cognitive load before we can get high quality work done efficiently and creatively while making far fewer mistakes. So what is cognitive load? Essentially, it's just what's on your mind or what your mind's trying to hold on to. And the more of that there is, the harder it is to keep track of. Our brains are incredible at solving problems and processing information, but comparatively, they're terrible at holding on to more than 3 or 4 concepts or ideas at a time. So the more we're trying to hold on to, the more we feel things slipping away, and that interplay between losing thoughts and constantly trying to keep track of them is internally stressful, no matter how good you think you are at it. As a result, we feel worse and we perform worse. Error rate increases, decision making is more difficult, and in general, we're more prone to overwhelm and stress. As we'll see shortly, this is purposeful for the struggle phase of flow, but when it comes time to perform at our best and feel our best, many flow triggers are specifically in place to lower cognitive load so that our attention can hone in on a specific task. Flow follows focus. So if you're trying to focus on too many things at one time, your focus will never be strong enough to get into flow. Understanding this concept and adopting habits that help you manage your cognitive load can have a big impact on your effectiveness while minimizing unnecessary stress. From my own experience, now that I'm aware of what's going on, I can definitely feel the anxiety building when I have too many things going on at once, and I can feel my ability to perform or think at a high level diminishing. This also has a terrible effect on sleep if you have too many things racing through your head right before bed. A simple habit that can be implemented is just writing down your thoughts or to-do items so that your brain doesn't have to hold on to them. Once they're out of your head and on a piece of paper, your brain can relax and you can be more effective at whatever you're doing. All right, so the flow cycle is the 4-stage cycle that helps lead to our best performance, but more importantly, sustain it over the long term. This is more obvious to see when it comes to more physical endeavors like high-level athletics or exercise, where periods of training are followed by periods of peak performance, which are necessarily followed by periods of rest and recovery. Our brains abide by the same biological laws as our body. They require resources for energy and performance. And when we use up those resources, we require time to rebuild them. We already understand the need for sleep to recover and recharge every day, but by learning more about the flow cycle, we can gain more insights and strategies into how to set ourselves up for sustained peak performance. The struggle phase is the initial phase where we fill up on the problem and relevant information to the point of overwhelm and frustration. You can't take your mind off the problem. The different elements just keep racing through your brain as you struggle to make sense of them. This can be thought of as training if we go back to our athlete analogy. This is where cognitive load is high on purpose as we try to cram as much relevant information in as possible. Chemically, this overloading triggers a heightened stress response, and we are alert, but in an anxious way. It's important to note that activities like scrolling on social media, shopping, watching the TV or news, or just multitasking in general, all send us into the struggle phase and elicit the same chemical stress response. If we think about how we work and how we spend our free time outside of work, it becomes pretty clear that as a society, we are constantly jumping from one struggle phase to another. It's no wonder we have skyrocketing rates of anxiety, burnout, and poor attention spans. Although the struggle phase is necessary, you don't have to spend the majority of your time there to reap the benefits. To move on from the struggle and set yourself up for your best efforts, you'll need to step away from what you're working on. The release phase is a huge missing piece in our current paradigm. We may mistake it for being unproductive or wasting time, but in fact, this is how we pull the slingshot back before launching into flow. This is where we deliberately take our mind off the problem and allow our subconscious to take over. This is done by engaging in low-grade physical exercise or some type of tactile task, which stimulates nitric oxide, helping to flush out the stress-related chemicals left over from the struggle phase. This is an important phase as it takes the information from the struggle phase out of the conscious mind and deposits it in the subconscious mind, where we have thousands of times more processing power. This is where information gets synthesized into some congruent narrative that you can make sense of. This is also why many aha moments happen when you're away from the project as opposed to pulling an all-nighter. This phase helps lower cognitive load, preparing us for flow, and is part of why we feel better if we take advantage of this phase in the flow cycle. Activities like walking, light exercise, household chores, or hobby work are all great ways to release. Essentially, we need something that isn't too challenging, but requires just enough of your attention to help you let go of what you've been working on during the struggle phase. So we've already talked a bit about flow in the previous module, but this is the part of the cycle where we get our peak level of focus and performance on a task. We release feel-good neurochemicals, increasing motivation, creativity, and learning. This is where we have access to the information that our brains loaded up on during the struggle phase that was further organized during the release phase, and now we can put all the pieces of the puzzle together to do our best work. If we use our athletics analogy again, this is basically game day where we want our best performance, but at this point, it should feel natural and intuitive rather than forced and overthinking. Flow is a state of relaxed high performance, not frenetic energy. Recovery is our final phase of the flow cycle. The body and brain need time to restock after the resource-intense flow phase. At this stage, we have used up many of our feel-good neurochemicals and performance-boosting neurochemicals, so we may feel some brain fog, a headache, or just a steep decline in cognitive or physical energy. It's better to take a break now if possible so you can get back to your high-level performance again soon, rather than draining the tank to absolute zero and prolonging the recovery time. Obviously, sometimes the deadline dictates when you can fully listen to your body, but even then, short breaks can immensely improve performance and help you get work done quicker and with less mistakes. So the flow cycle can happen at all scales. It can happen within a day, a week, or even over an entire year, or possibly a career. So the idea is not to feel locked into this cycle dogmatically. It's more that by being aware of the different stages and what they feel like, you can more accurately assess what your next moves should be. If you're feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, try adding more release breaks to your schedule or take a long weekend away. If you're feeling good and clear-minded and energized, you're probably ready for a challenge to help you get into flow. If you're feeling a little unmotivated after putting everything into a huge project, which you did great on, maybe consider a bit of recovery to help you build back some of the neurochemistry that you likely are running low on. Now we're going to switch gears and introduce the concept of flow triggers. Flow triggers are anything that heighten and tighten our level of focus. They tend to reduce the amount of things we're thinking about while amplifying our focus on what's left. They do this by stimulating some of the neurochemical and neuroanatomical changes that lead to flow states. Flow is an emergent state, meaning when the conditions are right, it may appear. So building lifestyles and workflows that create those conditions regularly is the best strategy to reliably improve focus, productivity, and stress levels. All right, so group flow, which we mentioned in the previous module, while similar in the overall concept to individual flow, has a few unique triggers that can be helpful to keep in mind, which we have listed up here on the slide. If we think about this swarm of fish or a flock of birds all moving in unison, they're navigating, assessing risk, and communicating instantaneously without any formal structure or hierarchy. It's difficult to believe that there isn't one mind controlling the group's movement. That's group flow. We know, however, that this isn't one mind controlling the group, but rather all the minds simultaneously contributing to the group's collective knowledge and awareness. The group flow trigger of blending egos allows all of them to be responsible for reacting and leading, which makes them smarter as a whole. They have a greater chance of success and survival as a group, using more minds to solve the collective problem. Forward momentum is another important group flow trigger to keep in mind. When in a setting where group flow is the goal, being combative is counterproductive. We want to be additive in order to build the momentum that will lead people to places and ideas they wouldn't have otherwise thought of. So what does it actually look like to implement a flow trigger? If we take the flow trigger of complete concentration, it sounds simple enough, but how do we create it? For starters, minimize as many distractions as possible. Think about noises, alerts, notifications, visual stimuli, etc. This can't be done all the time, but scheduling specific work blocks or flow blocks for 1 to 3 hours is the perfect time to set yourself up for complete concentration. Clear goals is another incredible flow trigger for most people. If we know what we're supposed to be doing now and we know what comes next, we aren't distracted by all the micro decisions that need to be made if the situation was less clear. The challenge to skills balance is another important flow trigger, which piggybacks nicely off of clear goals. In order to drive our best efforts, we want a challenge that butts right up against our capabilities, but is not too easy or too difficult, because that can lead to procrastination, either due to boredom or overwhelm. Keeping this trigger in mind when making clear goals can help you dial in these tasks to stimulate your best efforts. We'll talk about feedback in a future module, but it's another important flow trigger, which Jen will tell you all about. First, you need to set your North Star for the week, your priorities, no more than 3 to 5. We can dial this in down the road. If you're more capable, you can do more. If you find 5 difficult, you can do less. But typically this is done on a Friday or over the weekend, and usually with some input from a manager. Then you'll need periods of time to work on those priorities and cover ground. Those are your flow blocks. They're 1 to 3 hours of uninterrupted and minimally distracted time. How many do you need? As many as it takes to accomplish your priorities for the week, but as many as 2 per day, but even as little as 1 per week is an improvement for most people. Your power down ritual is how you end the day. You assess what you were able to accomplish versus what you were aiming to get done that day, and you set your priorities and clear goals for the next day. You probably also do an inbox check here to make sure you account for anything that needs to be taken care of or scheduled. This 20 to 30-minute end of day ritual is meant to help set you up to hit the ground running the next morning, as well as lower your cognitive load going into the evening. This is the clear delineation between work and the rest of your day. This also gives you a chance to continuously dial in how much quality work you can get done in a day. If you're always finding yourself not completing your to-do lists, maybe you should dial things back. It'll drive dopamine and motivation more if you feel good about completing what you set out to do, leading to better long-term performance and mental health. The clear goals you set during the power down ritual should be specific enough to allow you to get working on them right away without fumbling around trying to figure out where to start. They should also be small enough to be completed within that given day or flow block. If it's so big that it'll take all week to accomplish, then it's not a clear goal, and it needs to be broken down into smaller components in order to really drive flow the way clear goals are designed to. They also should be laid out sequentially if possible or appropriate. Nothing lowers cognitive load more than knowing exactly what you're meant to do now and what comes next. We also want time set aside throughout the day and week for release and recovery phases of the flow cycle. So short breaks during the day for food, bathroom, walks, or sunshine can make a big difference in how well your mind is able to function and how well you're able to sustain that over a long period of time. Having some kind of evening recovery practice is also probably a good idea. More on that when we have our module on burnout, though. Lastly, you'll want to make sure you have a chance to reflect on the week and what you accomplished versus what priorities you set for yourself at the beginning of the week. Make note of any issues that popped up and slowed you down, or things you need to start to schedule around. Maybe Tuesdays you have 6 meetings and you realize you don't have any chance of getting into flow that day, so make it more about administrative tasks and save the flow blocks for other days where you can be more productive. A little reflection and self-feedback can add up over time to help dial in the schedule and habits that lead to your best work and best satisfaction and balance in life.
Okay, so that's a wrap for Module 2, all about flow triggers and the flow cycle. Just to kind of work through some key takeaways that we want you to make sure you didn't miss. And that is you need to actively protect your mind from multitasking and use strategies that lower cognitive load so that you can do high quality work. The flow cycle is really just a general framework that you can keep in mind in order to pursue flow and to be creative and get that maximum performance that you want. The flow and group flow triggers are specific conditions that you can apply within the flow cycle that help you drive your performance, and they minimize cognitive load. So those are the tools. The flow triggers are the tools that are going to help you achieve flow. And then to sustain peak performance, you can move through the full flow cycle, but make sure that you're not neglecting release and the recovery phase as well. Those are really critical to getting into flow. That said, as you prepare yourselves for our group session coming up, you'll want to make sure that you are ready to talk about these things. First, we would love to know what is the difference between high and low cognitive load from you. And a bonus if you can describe how each one feels for you. Next, where do you feel you spend most of your time within the flow cycle? What parts of the flow cycle do you see that you are neglecting? Or what parts of the flow cycle do you think you're doing really well? We'd also love to know how you could use the flow cycle to achieve higher levels of performance in your role. So think about your role in general. How can this help you perform higher, better, faster, whatever that is? What flow triggers help you get into flow at work? So revisit those flow triggers, take a pause, do a screenshot, whatever you need to do, write them down, and figure out which ones do you think are going to help you the most. We'd also love for you to share a story. Think about a time when you have experienced group flow with your current team or with a previous team and describe what that experience was like for you. And then finally, we'd love to hear from you. What group flow triggers do you think helps your team generate your best ideas and make your sharpest decisions? So, of those that were listed on that screen, go back, pause, screenshot, write them down, whatever you need to do. Which ones do you think will help you as a group? That's a wrap for today. We appreciate your time and we'll see you in Module 3. Take care.